So the reason we're here is not to discuss, I think this was billed as, conversation around the human sexuality report. It's not to discuss the human sexuality report. Because, we've already, in a variety of ways, Ron has, I think, been pretty clear about what Hillside's stance is on that, and he'll perhaps reiterate that tonight. It's not to discuss or debate that or have a conversation about that. It's really about the most recent synodical decisions and how that impacts how we have how we select and have leadership at Hillside, and what does that mean for us, and some consideration that we need to have kind of a moving forward on that, on who may be leaders and who may not.
So, yeah, where are we in the CRC as a denomination? What decisions have been made, and so on? Again, the last three synods have made it clear that the Christian Reformed Church stance on homosexual activity is that homosexual activity is a sin, that it is outside of God's word, outside of God's will for followers of Jesus Christ. So, with that said, in some ways that's a really important decision. Now, we did also, the denomination has said all the way since 1973 that the orientation by itself is not necessarily sinful, in that just as I didn't choose to be heterosexual, somebody often doesn't choose to be homosexual. They just experience that. What we've said as a church then, that they're not culpable for the feeling, they're culpable if they nurture it, if they develop it, if they act on it. But the feeling itself is not one that we would call sinful. And I think importantly, since 1973, we have been called to love homosexual people, to be genuinely caring, to recognize these are people created in God's image. And as I tried to say a week ago yesterday, if I'm going to call them to celibacy, I should walk with them in love and encouragement and strength. And so I think that's really important. The council has said this is where Hillside Church is. We agree and will live within the denominational standard of this, that we will, as a church, teach and preach and live out that God's intent for marriage is a man and a woman in a monogamous, lifelong relationship. All right, so that's what we will do. The question comes, and it's important, and sometimes it's hard to grasp this. So in a sense, the main question is here, and that's what Daryl said, yep, okay, we're here with that. But what happens is, as that question was being answered the last 3 years, a number of other questions got raised about the church and about who can serve in the church. All right? What happened was that Synod declared this to be a matter that is, the term that we use is confessional, and it refers to, we have three confessions in our church: the Heidelberg Catechism, the Belgic Confession, and the Canons of Dort. And these are sort of what define us within the Christian community as kind of our way of thinking about things, all right? And what we've said is office bearers in the church, elders, deacons, and pastors need to agree with the things that are taught in the confessions, okay? And need to say, yep, I agree with those things. Up until about 3 years ago, it seemed to me a stronger recognition of saying, but there are going to be some things where I might have questions or wonderings or uncertainties, and on those, as long as I agree not to teach on them, I can still serve. As long as I agree to submit and lead and teach the position of the church, I can still serve in leadership. And sometimes that was done in an official way with something called a gravamen. Sometimes it was done in an unofficial way with just conversations. And so an example would be, and I pick on Andy all the time, but Andy is a son of a Baptist minister. He was a Baptist minister. And while he is reformed in many ways, there is somebody inside of him that still thinks, he's still an adult baptizer kind of guy, all right? Now, as far as I know, Andy and Deanna are not going to have more children. And so could Andy serve as an elder here, as long as he agrees to say, yeah, I'm not going to teach adult baptism, that or teach against infant baptism, I will defend the position of the church. So we have had several situations like that at Hillside in the past where we've said, yeah, go ahead and serve. So that way of doing that was changed in the last 3 years, and specifically this summer, the decision was made that this thing called a gravamen, where I say, I'm not sure about this area or whatever, it was, that can't be a permanent thing, and you can't enter an office with a gravamen or a gravamen. All right, you can't, if you have questions, not questions, but if you have a difficulty or a settled position contrary to one of the confessions, then you're not supposed to serve in any office whatsoever. And so I understand why that was done, and so on, but it seems to me that it has some unintended consequences that put us in a position where we are. Some of the reason why that was done, and just to make clear, the Christian Reformed Church again has made it clear it will take a couple of years probably before it all gets settled out, to maybe 3, but there will not be any openly affirming Christian churches in the Christian Reformed Church. There just won't be any churches that are openly affirming. They will either choose to leave, openly affirming of homosexual activity. They will either choose to leave or they will be asked and required to leave. So that edge is said, nope, that's outside of who we are. Not saying necessarily outside of Christ, but just saying that to be openly affirming like that is not where we are. Hillside is now asking the question of saying, we agree with the position, but we know we have members and some of the leadership here who have served, who don't hold to that position, but have served, have not taught against it, agree not to teach against it. How do we then, what do we do? Do we say, you know what, we're going to just kind of take the denominational stuff in its strongest way and say, can't serve anymore if you disagree on this? Part of the challenge there is there's a lot more than just this that one can disagree with. To say I have to be 100% without reservation on every doctrine is really challenging. Sometimes I think the Baptists make a pretty good point. Don't tell Andy, but I think they have some pretty good things. Sometimes the simplicity of God discussed in the Belgic Confession. Sometimes the presence of Christ discussed in these things. I said, I'm not sure that's exactly right. There are certain ways of reading this that would say, I can't serve as a pastor in this denomination anymore if it's read that tightly. So it was interesting. Part of what's going on, so that's really, in a sense, for the next year or two, I think that's what the discussion is going to be about. Okay, what really is required here? Having said no churches that are affirming, is there room for somebody who has some level of disagreement? The synod, when they're done, they put out a response of frequently asked questions, a document, and interestingly, probably 10 days ago or something, 11 days ago, they actually updated that. And one of the key things they said addresses exactly what we've been talking about. And so it's interesting because I've been saying, I was at synod, and it sounds really harsh, but it was not that harsh in discussion. And so what this is now the answer now on the synodical page is, affirming the covenant of office bearers without reservation does not mean that office bearers cannot have wonderings or questions. So somebody somewhere said, this is untenable to say this person, we all promise never to wonder about anything. I mean, it's just the nature for many of us to wonder. And so the denomination is still sort of trying to figure that out. So we're in this place where this much is settled, but can we have office bearers who agree or don't agree, and where that's going to go? Again, the harshest, the clearest, strongest reading is you disagree, you can't serve, which would impact us here. And so that led us as a council to say, okay, now what are we going to do? And then, Daryl, you want to?
Yep. Yeah,
Are there any questions?
Yeah, first, any questions about that and comments?
Anything you wondered if I said something? Did you go, what? Okay, feel free to ask questions later as well.
Yep, I'll write them on a paper. So one of the things is we kind of field some questions in your reaction to what's next. You see at the bottom of the page of your handout, and again, we'll make this available for those who are on online as well. And is a series of meetings over the course of the next several months that a group of some of the long-range planning committee members will be a part of it. Some of the council will be a part of it. A couple of staff members will be a part of that meeting, those meetings. 3 for sure scheduled meetings, and then if there's overflow in another meeting, perhaps in December. We're kind of holding that. We think we can do it in 3.5 hour meetings. I would think we could do it in 3.5 hour meetings, wouldn't you? But we'll see. So here's what we're going to talk about at those in those meetings. So the scenario planning options to consider, and what we're doing is we're asking all of us who are serving that group to kind of, for now, set aside our biases, because some of us believe we know where we should land on this already without having discussed it. But we want to make sure that we discuss all the options, because there's both what's happening now and what's developing over time relative to, in the Christian Reformed Church, including whether or not each member must agree without reservation to all of those things. That's 2 years out, but that's at least dangling out there as a possibility, and that would be my view. I have to be careful here on this, but my view, that would be hard to accomplish and do as we welcome people in to make profession of faith and say, I know you want to make profession of faith and you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, but do you believe all of this without reservation? I'm being a little facetious, but maybe on purpose. So that is a maybe out there. 2 years from now, a committee is working to make that recommendation. So what we've said is, one option A, is to remain in the CRC and follow the office bearer directives with no gravamina. We have, over the last number of years, welcomed, invited, encouraged people with a variety of opinions. One of the things about Hillside, at least that I appreciate, is we have, not in terms of the world, but in terms of the Christian church, and especially the Christian Reformed Church, a fairly broad spectrum of beliefs on politics, on various social issues, and on this particular issue. And I think personally think it's helpful to be able to listen to people from different perspectives and have them in leadership. If we did this, we would say, anybody who has any doubts could not be invited to serve and would not be able to serve. We currently have some council members who would be in that boat now. The Synod decision allowed up to 3 years for people to be shepherded into the current posture and thinking of the Christian Reformed Church. The second option is remain in the CRC, continue to draw leadership from a broad spectrum of the congregation, and trust that we can interpret the guidelines from Synod and to allow us to have grace around that and allow us to invite a variety of folks in membership. So that's the second option. The third option is to leave the CRC and join another denomination. Fourth option is to leave the CRC and become a non-denominational church. Now, you notice I didn't have this thing up here at the very start because I didn't want anybody to run out of the room screaming when they saw all 4 of those options, because some of you might think, that option is untenable, or this option is untenable, and I understand that. And some people are coming into that meeting. We've invited people to come into these meetings to say, hey, suspend your initial thoughts about this, and let's study these and the implications and the benefits and the negatives to each one, and then come back for more conversation or for some decisions by the council and more conversation with the congregation. So here's what I'd like you to do. First, any questions about those, and then I'm going to ask you to go into small groups. And what I'd like you to think about is, and you can choose any of those options. If you have questions about any of those options and or concerns about any of those options, and we'll record those. So what I'd like you to do is, here's a group of 4, and there's a group of 4, and there's a group of 4 and 3 and 4. There, I just divided you up however you want, but you can do it. You can do it however you want. But
one thing, Daryl, I want to make sure that everybody understands this timeline that leads to December is for this team. It's not like we'll make a decision for the whole church by then.
Right.
We'll know next steps by then. And if we do anything with leaving the denomination or whatever, there will be plenty of conversation. And if we, this is not like, okay, we have to decide this right now.
Right.
So we don't feel necessarily, but we also don't want to, in some ways, this group could come back and say, let's stay where we are for the next year and see what happens at Synod next summer. This group could say,
Right.
But we wanted to look at all of it just to get an idea, to know what different things involve.
Right.
So
yeah.
Now I do want to ask a
Yeah, good.
something you said, like, before what I had heard was Synod was so seemingly abrupt that this is the decision, and people were saying, no discussion. Something you said now makes it sound like there maybe that they're still looking at. Like they're wondering things. I wonder about them all the time.
Well, and that's where, again, to say, not the issue is not going to be up for debate. Let's recognize that. It's not that we're going to, the Synod will not, 3 years in a row have been very clear.
Okay.
What's still discussed up for question is saying, can somebody serve? If they agreeing to say, I'm not going to teach, but can they serve if they have questions about this?
Still change on.
What's that?
That's what they could still change on if.
Right, the level of how many. I mean, again, it's and there's it's so hard at a Synod to make decisions and to figure out how everything goes, because we talk about settled convictions and we talk about difficulties, and when the committee that was in charge of that at Synod was asked, will you define those? And they said no. The local church will define those. Well, that was giving some more room back to the local church to make some decisions. So again, we're not talking about being affirming. We're talking about just saying, can somebody who struggles with it or has it, whatever, and agrees not to talk, can they serve? That's really the question that impacts us. Does that make sense?
Well, I have a question. I can't wrap my mind around it, because how would anybody ever write a gravamen if you could never think critically about anything? Nobody would. You'd be out of line if you were even thinking about, is this really true or not? And if you actually write it down and make an argument, that's like forbidden. Everything is like, oh, if that's what it says, that's what I believe. Like you have to shut your brain off. Nobody would ever write a gravamen.
Well, and I think that's part of what is being discussed, of saying, hold on, we wanted to close this door here, but did we inadvertently also close down some other things that we shouldn't have? Because again, it doesn't just get applied to one issue, it has to apply to every issue that's confessional. Does that make sense? I mean, I think that in some ways, that's why this came out 10 days ago saying, it doesn't mean you can't have questions or wonderings.
they did say you can question in one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
That's 10 days ago. They changed the synodical site to say it does not mean you cannot have questions and wonderings. So I don't know if the more conservative group is going to say, that's no good. That's not what synod meant. And so those questions take time because you meet once a year. So.
Just to add a little levity to the room.
Okay.
I'm 74 years old. How in the world, went to Kelvin, how have I never heard that word gravamina before in my life?
Well, when I was at Kelvin, I wrote a paper about it, Gary, so I don't know how you got through it. No, several things. One is, it is actually, when one has a gravamen or a gravamina or gravamina, it's actually a decision that's made within the council. It doesn't get shared outside of that. So one would not know how many people are doing these things. Most of the time, what we did here was just kind of say, hey, this person isn't sure about this. Do we have a problem with that, or should we still let them stand for elder or deacon? We didn't go through the formal process. So that's probably why.
So, but there
Yeah.
have been a few people who have said, because there's another forum who said, hey, I have a difficulty with that, and not only that, I'd like the synod to consider that. I mean, so a number of people have done that in the past too about some issues. So that's a different kind of gravamen. But let's start with the back left corner, and let's just have I know you have a whole host of things to share, perhaps each of you, and that's all right. But I'm going to just ask for one thing at a time, and we'll go around the circle. So one thing, what do you have?
Okay, we'll start with A. That scenario is very, very strict, and it does not seem to fit us here at Hillside.
For A, we had our question would be like, who would that limit to serve? Like that we were concerned of the limitations that would put on the abilities of our leadership.
We were just talking with A about forcing others to, a concern I guess with, and I'm not sure I understood it correctly, but forcing others to follow our opinions or feelings on something. And I have a question, but it's gonna sound really bad. For letter C.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just if I may say my opinion, I don't want to leave the CRC, but what are the advantages, disadvantages? I've been in it all my life, so I don't know anything else.
And that would be both on C and D, right? I mean, right? Because both of them involve leaving the CRC, but right?
See, that's why I don't want to be note taker.
Yeah. All right. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't know all the advantages and disadvantages. That study committee is going to have to wrestle with that, because what they're going to do it like a T-table on each one. Okay. What are the advantages of doing this? So we're going to kind of go all in and say we're going to do this. What are all the advantages and disadvantages? Pitfalls. What hurdles might we have? What are the communication messages around that? And so I don't pretend to know what those are.
I felt bad that I didn't know, but then I feel better.
Well, I think it's fair to say this. Somebody in one of the meetings said, hey, it took me 4 years of attending here before I even knew we were a CRC church. I didn't even know, so I don't know what that means. And so, some of us, have been in the denomination a long time and others not. And so it means more to some people than it does to others, I think. So.
Where Jesus would have gone.
Yeah, well, where would Jesus affiliate? Huh? Okay, so is that a bracelet or something like that? Okay, how about this group? You didn't.
We were listening.
You were listening to each other? What did you hear each other say?
So, first a concern that we heard in our group was, in our experience, there have been churches that have been dissolved and separated over this, and now it's happening to the denomination, and the concern was this church, right? So I think it was also expressed that this is a good thing, hopefully, that we can be proactive. It's a tough thing.
So I'm going to take kind of a license to kind of put this on, not on the Gravamina sheet, but on this one, because this is an overriding comment, if I heard you correctly, about, you know, all this is, concern is other churches have imploded over this. I don't want to read too much. Let's not allow that to happen to us. You didn't say that, but that's what I wanted to hear. Is that, I mean, I've used a lot of editorial license here when I wrote that down, but care that we not allow this issue to allow the church to implode, right? But then I also heard an advantage. Say that one for me again.
Well, so I have a couple different feelings about this, because I feel like Synod was trying to be proactive and trying to address this, and I feel like we're just doing this on a different level. But I also hope and pray that I don't know, that we can, that God can bless our efforts here, and that we can, I don't know, just grow in our love, and no matter what the decisions or outcome, and that God be praised through it all.
Okay, so I did my best to capture that. Close enough? Okay.
And we're dealing here, part of the struggle is we're dealing with two really important Christian values: love for each other and unity, and truth, and trying to make sure we're also in line with what God says. And how those come together, that's not always easy to figure out. And it's not that one side I'm saying is love and one side is grace. I'm saying, or truth. I mean, but all of us are committed to truth. All of us are committed to love. I don't think, again, those who, I don't think you have to choose one or the other. You have to try to hold both. And I think all of us can be committed to both and still struggle with what that looks like in our lives and for our church.
And for our own thoughts and beliefs about this particular issue, right? I would add that. So we'll come back to this group, and you can, make sure somebody's got some. How about back in the corner again? Any more to share?
We thought C and D, those are kind of scary to read those, to leave the CRC and join another denomination, or just become non-denominational. Like, no one in our group really wanted to see Hillside have to go through that. We also wondered with C, how do you join another denomination and not still have the same problems? Doesn't every denomination struggle with those who ask questions? And I don't see how that would solve the problem.
Who came up with the 4 scenarios? Is that what our council did, or is that?
Yeah, no.
And the long-range planning committee and the council kind of together, yeah.
Okay.
And there's likely to be, as we explore them, variations on each of those themes, by the way. I'd be surprised if there weren't. Yeah. I'll leave it at that. I'll drop my voice. How about anything more over here?
Our second one that we had kind of followed along with what you wrote up there. We were just concerned that leaving the CRC would be hard on us as a church. We were talking about how proud we were of the ministries that we have here and all that we were able to do to be a part of the community and the fellowship that we have here. just concerns of what that would look like if we did leave.
Yeah. And I'm going to take license. I got some of that here, but I'll take one of the license to kind of just another kind of overriding thing is how can we assure that ongoing ministries and missions can keep going no matter what? Because I think and now I'm editorializing again, so I'm going to announce when I'm editorial, because we have a lot of great things happening here. I mean, people are being added to our number daily, right? I've heard that said before about other churches back in the day, right? Not quite daily maybe, but people are being added to our numbers. I mean, lots of ministries and lots of people's lives are being impacted. We don't want to mess that up, right?
Just a comment on that.
Yeah.
You realize some of those numbers are being added because of the other churches in the CRC splitting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's true, unfortunately.
It is, I didn't know this. And some of our new members,
Yeah, there's some of the local churches have just really gone through some really, really difficult times trying to figure out how to handle this, and just
they're trending one way or
it's
another,
scary.
so hence
Right.
people leave.
Right.
It's just scary to try to figure out how to. I can tell you a number of things that haven't worked. I don't know if I can tell you what has in any local church. That's the truth. I can tell you some things that haven't, but it's just tough. And that's part of where I think I want us to take the time to see, can we grow and listen to each other well enough to somehow not have that happen? Can we, and my guess is at the end, some folks will say, I need to be someplace else. But can we do it in such a way that it's by grace and love and
Because I'm understanding that there are people with a range of views on this position that are members of our church. I mean, I know people have talked to me, sent me messages. And without being glib about it, but I remember, I was not in the council at the time, but when the council went through making decisions around how to care, how to deal with COVID, there were those who said council was being too heavy-handed and kind of, too much fear and not enough faith. There were those who said council was not being careful enough and following the health guidelines enough. And again, not to be glib, but I guess if we had equal numbers of those and still managed to get along okay, we were all right. But we will have some people leave on both sides, I suspect, on both sides of this equation. I used to think optimistically that a church could hold together with both views in place, and that's what I would like to believe, right? John 17:21, that they all may be one, so that the world will know, right? And that's what I hope. That's what my hope is. Not sure we can. I mean, yeah. But I can tell you what my aspiration is, right? So any more here? Even if you're under protest for having to be the recorder. What's your name, by the way? Again, remind. Callie.
I've been going for years.
I know, but I'm not. I sit at the same place every Sunday.
Meetings now of people that are this concerned is
Mhm.
reassuring to me.
Yeah.
We care enough to
Yep.
be here.
Means a great deal. Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been thinking as I sat here, I don't know if maybe you had this in your mind, but I was thinking somehow we maybe ought to find a way to communicate from different groups to,
I think we do need to kind of summarize all that we heard. I think we owe it to everybody who was here to summarize. That's my plan.
part of one of my, I think it's a conclusion. My guess is I can say to you, wherever you are, you're probably not alone.
That
Wherever you are on this, after 3 meetings, you are probably not alone. If you feel like this is clear, I don't know why anybody would question it. You're not alone. There are others who feel that way. If you feel like this is just a matter of loving people, I can't believe we would have to question. You're not alone. There are other people, but we have to say, and again, some of it you'd have to take a basic position, but then how do you live together in love?
Mm-hmm. And part of it is, I hope, is it sets us up then to talk about, even after all this, the dust settles, how do we love each other better? Because one of the things we want to do at the center of all this is say, in its simplest form, how do we continue to follow Jesus, love others, and create authentic community, right? There's a longer statement, but that's the summary one, right? I'm not smart enough to remember any more than that. But so at the center of that, we want to hold that up as the goal. And what's the best way to do that? And so that's the hope. So I got distracted by asking if you, but any more stuff? Any more from your group?
And I have all sorts of things I want to say, but we want these to be listening sessions, so I'm
How about here?
trying to be quiet.
Any more here? Observations, thoughts?
This is just my personal observation. But in Philippians 3, Paul talks about, I want to be like Christ, basically. You know, but not that I've already attained all this or have already been made perfect. But I press on, you know, next step up. But, you know, to get all the way to the top of perfection, no, none of us. Then he says, all of us who are mature should take such a view of things. We're all at different levels of development. And then he says, and if on some point you think differently, that too God will make clear to you. Only let us live up to what we have already attained.
Amen.
And that's scripture. And what it says to me applied to this is, okay, somebody doesn't think the synodical report is accurate. I think it's accurate. Somebody doesn't think that homosexual behavior should be classified as unchastity in all cases. I just not going to argue about it. God will make it clear to them. But in the meantime, I'm going to live according to my belief. And I think that's the biblical idea. That, you know, mind control, make everybody just agree with every last little thing. You can't do it. I mean, that's my opinion.
Well stated.
Yeah, I can't summarize that with a note.
Could we remain in the CRC if we don't believe with, following some of what the Senate says?
Yeah, so that would be a question is, can we do this? And, and test my words, not, and kind of test the edges of what that means relative to who we allow to serve in leadership positions. I don't think we fully know. And that, if we were writing up a T-chart, that would be, maybe a con of that, hey, we might have to live with a bunch of uncertainty. Sounds like a summary of that mini sermon we just heard, right?
I also wonder with B. Suppose the council takes a certain individual case and says, we're okay with this. And suppose Synod, who can define what Synod thinks, but suppose somebody decides that that's not in accord with Synod's directions. Who's going to come after us?
Probably would start with classical visitors.
I've seen that over and over. The classical visitors don't carry a whole lot of weight. They'd have to come back and say, we have a real problem with this to the whole classis, and then the classis would have to make some decision. That's pretty rare. I don't...
One of the really interesting things, and again, in the CRC, we've tried to have a balance between Presbyterians tend to have more power to the classis and the denomination. Congregationalists have more power down to the congregation. We've tried to balance that and that's one of the challenges is saying, okay, well then how much does this group really get to control this group, and how much does this group get to control this group? And interesting, I think in some ways that the denomination is 150 or so years old, and we've kind of been able to get by without fully answering that. And so I don't know what that says, but it says something. So now that's part of why, in some ways, again, it's kind of like, well, what can we do about this? Can this group do this to this group? And I think there are some things that the Synod has said about classes and individual churches that are going to have to be followed. And so the question is, how far is that going to go in other areas? So.
Just an observation, just like about Hillside. I have worked in an organization and I watched them go from A to B to C to D, and it was just almost, they just decided to become more and more and more and more of the world. And the things that were happening in the world, and certain people were influencing that we have to agree with all of this. And that means love, like what Ron's talking about a little bit, because we have to love everyone and we can't say no to certain things because then we're not loving them. Anyway, I love how Ron would always say, I remember we did a sermon series a long time ago on being weird and being different than what was going on in the world. And I still think holding to the Bible and to the biblical truths in the Bible now is almost like a weird thing to do. But for me personally, I don't know what else to do but to stick to the Bible, because there's so much out there that's just so much. And I think Hillside and Ron's, and leadership keeps us unique, which shouldn't be unique, but not so much of the world, but we're hanging on to. And I don't know if we're hanging on to the CRC beliefs. I think that we are.
And yeah, and when we talk about some of the advantages, disadvantages of denominations, that's one of them, is some level of accountability outside of, ourselves. Some level of somebody who's going to challenge us if we start to get a little wacky. Somebody had asked at one of the other meetings about, well, what if we go to, let's see, D and become non-denominational, who's going to be in charge? And I thought the answer was pretty clear. And all of a sudden, nobody wanted to do D anymore. I don't know. But no, right? I mean, what's the structure? There's a lot of questions there, and that's why none of this would be taken like, well, let's just do this without thinking about, oh man, if we did that, what actually would that mean? I mean, you'd have to come up with your own church order or your own whatever, right? And
IFCA.
What's that?
IFCA.
The Independent Fundamentalist Churches of America. I don't know why they have denominational offices, because they're all independent, but they do, and I always think that's... Okay, I'm going to talk about bread for a minute.
Yeah, but first I want to make sure, did I come close enough to say, be careful about erosion? I almost wrote, you didn't say the words, but again, you have to be careful about what I hear and write. So I want to make sure I capture that. I almost wrote, be careful about slippery slope.
You're like going rogue.
Okay.
Going rogue, yeah. All right, so here is my best guess as to what's happening in the denomination right now, and what's interesting about what the next couple of years. So if you think of the denomination as a loaf of bread, and it's got slices, right? And over on the one end, there's the slices that are very conservative and concerned about becoming too much like the world, and are saying we got to draw the line, we got to hold the line, okay? Over here were the churches that were saying, no, we can be openly affirming. This is the loving thing to do, and so on. And what happened, and what so often happens in situations like this, is where does the middle go? Where does the middle go? And on the last 3 years, I think what the middle has said is, we're going to agree with the churches that are saying we got to hold the line, and we're going to slice off, so to speak, and let them find their own way, but lovingly, but slice off those who are openly affirming. Okay? So, in a sense, what I think we need to do is, I think that now there's another decision, and the middle is going to redecide. This last year, and so now we have a new end here, right? And the question is, how far off of this end do we need to cut off? Do we need to cut off every church that has members who disagree on this? Do we need to cut off every church that has council members who disagree on this issue? How much further are we going to cut off? And it was interesting to me because there were several times this year where the group that was here, where the middle started to say to this group, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to say this far. We're not ready to cut off these folks. And so I think that's kind of where we are, is deciding, in a sense, can Hillside be what we've been, of saying, all right, yes, we hold to the denominational position, but we're not going to make it a litmus test of leadership necessarily in this, so are we still part of the loaf? Or is the middle going to say, no, you're not part of the loaf either? Now, does that make sense? And so what I think is interesting is to see, okay, now, again, we've had one issue, and clearly, and again, I think it wasn't just the middle, it was a lot of us who would say, yeah, and this, we have to make this decision. We have to make a decision about whether we are, as a denomination, going to have affirming churches or not. Now, in a sense, it's a new day. And these other decisions are still being made. Some people think I'm too optimistic and hopeful of saying, I think that we might see some, that's why I was so excited when they came out and said, no, you can have questions or wonderings. And again, I think I've made it clear, I'll say it again if I haven't, I take the traditional position. So I'm not trying to say, oh, really, I want us to get Hillside over here. No, I still take that, but we've always been thoughtful and loving and caring, trying to figure out how that looks. So anyway, so that's why I think right now we're in a place where it'll just be interesting to see. In the next 2 years at Synod, does the middle say, I mean, even on so the questions where that came out, for example, there was a question of, do we declare this a salvation issue? And those who were on this end wanted to say, yes, we do. If you're wrong on this one, your salvation is in question. And the middle said, no, we're not going to use that language. We're not going to use that language. And so that was one that, and so it was, for me, I felt like that was what was going on at Synod, is you're starting to see a little more saying, no, we're with you on this one, but not with you on that one. And I don't know where we'll all end up. I hope that wasn't more confusing.
I enjoyed the crust tonight at dinner.
Yeah, Daryl said, I love the crust. What do I do?
Until he started describing those two as that end of the loaf.
And again, it's not good end and bad end, okay? That's just reality of those two,
All right.
You like both crusts?
I usually am the first one to take the crust if I'm allowed.
Do you take both sides?
In the end, I do. I couldn't. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I know that at school, like every time there's a change in the school board, the priorities shifted. Could that happen with Synod? I mean, Synod shifts, doesn't it?
Synod shifts some, but it's highly unlikely that it will shift again on the issue of affirming, non-affirming as a church. But it could shift on these other ones potentially a little bit. Does that answer your question of saying?
As much as what I think.
But
more
it's been so clear, the numbers have been so clear that it's not just and it was 3 years running. So it was not this year it went this way, next year it went that way, next year it went that way. It's kind of up in the air. It's pretty clear where the CRC is on this.
And further, anybody who currently is serving and has a gravamen cannot vote at classis or be a voting delegate at synod. So, I mean, that's
right.
been
the
assured.
The loaf changes a little bit when you cut off a part.
Right.
Does that make sense? And so,
and I suspect, by the way, that would remain. That would be the case if we chose here, if we had folks in leadership and council who, had a gravamen or multiple ones, a gravamen, I can't say it. So a lot of those, could not be a voting delegate at classis or synod. Now maybe that. No.
No, that's a brand new thing too.
The ability to vote. Right.
Yeah, it's been okay in the past.
Right.
So
that's new. That's new as of this last synod.
it's unfortunate. One of the things that hit me at synod was how much distrust there is of the other side,
of the other.
from both sides. And there were times when I wanted to stand up and say, shame on both of you, because you are both playing the game you're accusing the other one of right now on this issue. You are both misrepresenting your own positions here in order to get what you want. We are all capable of doing that. I am just a little above it, but no, the line. Alexander Solzhenitsyn has said the line of human sin does not go between race or class. It goes down every single human heart. Good and evil is not us and them, it is me and me.
All of us. I see that hand. Was that a real?
Sure, it's a real hand. So under A, is that meaning on just the human sexuality thing or on everything that's in all three of those confessions? Is that,
So I think that's everything. So
is that what they intended?
Yes.
I don't know if that's what they intended, but that's
Oh,
what
yeah.
they wrote.
Okay.
We'll see if that's what they intended, but that is what they wrote. Because, I'll tell you the story about me. I first became a deacon in a Christian Reformed church in 1979. And so I was signing the form of subscription. And as I signed it, I was a smart aleck. Then, when I was young, I should have learned better. By now, I haven't. I said, so is this where I'm promising to detest the Anabaptists? Because that's in the Belcher Confession, right?
Heidelberg Catechism, right?
Oh.
Isn't it the Heidelberg
They
Catechism?
changed it, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
somebody must have questioned it.
Yeah, maybe. So anyway, yeah, I don't take credit for it, but, and I was just joking, because I knew that's not what they meant, but so in my own way, that's what I was, in my naive self, that's what I was doing. And so in some respects, that the letter of the law says that.
One of the things I think that helps and is important in a discussion like this is let's make sure that we don't just assume because we heard one thing from somebody that we know exactly what they think. I'll give you an example just from yesterday. Eric had talked about if you were there, he said, I'm not going to deal with the homosexual thing, they're dealing with that in there. And he actually had a couple of people say, oh, that's because you're affirming, right? He's not, okay? He's okay saying that and with me saying that. But, we so easily jump to conclusions and assumptions and accusations and saying, well, this is what you must believe. Friends, we're complex. Please talk to each other. If I've said anything tonight that you say, I can't believe you said that, I can either say, wow, I'm sorry, that was wrong, or that was just stupid, or, well, here's what I was thinking when I said it. This is what I meant. The number of conversations I had like that with people at Synod were a good number, where we could sit down and say, hold on, what do you mean when you say this? All right, well, if you mean that, then I'm okay with this. Okay. But it takes a long time. So let's listen to each other well. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time together. Make us hungry for Jesus. Break our hearts for a world that needs him. Give us hunger for grace and truth. So we present Jesus. And Lord, help us to be your people in all that we say and do. And we pray that you will protect your church. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.